Part 1, Section 1 of the Illustrated Key to the Tarot by L.W. de Laurence. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Michelle Dyer. Part 1, The Veil and its Symbols. Section 1, Introductory and General. The pathology of the poet says that the undevout astronomer is mad. The pathology of the very plain man says that the genius is mad. And between these extremes, which stand for 10,000 analogous excesses, the sovereign reason takes the part of a moderator and does what it can. I do not think that there is a pathology of the occult dedications, but about their extravagances no one can question, and it is not less difficult than thankless to act as a moderator regarding them. Moreover, the pathology, if it existed, would probably be an empiricism rather than a diagnosis, and would offer no criterion. Now, occultism is not like mystic faculty, and it very seldom works in harmony either with business aptitude in the things of ordinary life, or with a knowledge of the canons of evidence in its own sphere. I know that for the high art of ribaldry there are few things more dull than the criticism which maintains that a thesis is untrue, and cannot understand that it is decorative. I also know that after long dealing with doubtful doctrine, or with difficult research, it is always refreshing, in the domain of this art, to meet with what is obviously of fraud or at least of complete unreason. But the aspects of history, as seen through the lens of occultism, are not as a rule decorative, and have few gifts of refreshment to heal the lacerations which they inflict on the logical understanding. It almost requires a Frater Sapiens Dominabitur Astris in the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross to have the patience which is not lost amidst the clouds of folly when the consideration of the tarot is undertaken in accordance with the higher law of symbolism. The true tarot is symbolism. It speaks no other language and offers no other signs. Given the inward meaning of its emblems, they do become a kind of alphabet, which is capable of indefinite combinations and makes true sense in all. On the highest plane, it offers a key to the mysteries, in a manner which is not arbitrary and has not been read in. But the wrong symbolical stories have been told concerning it, and the wrong history has been given in every published work which so far has dealt with the subject. It has been intimated by 2 or 3 writers that, at least in respect of the meanings, this is unavoidably the case, because few are acquainted with them, while these few hold by transmission under pledges and cannot betray their trust. The suggestion is fantastic on the surface, for there seems a certain anticlimax in the proposition that a particular interpretation of fortune-telling, les arts de tirer les cartes, can be reserved for the sons of doctrine. The fact remains, notwithstanding, that a secret tradition exists regarding the tarot, and there is always the possibility that some minor arcana of the mysteries may be made public with the flourish of trumpets. It will be as well to go before the event and to warn those who are curious in such matters that any revelation will contain only a third part of the earth and the sea and a third part of the stars of heaven in respect of the symbolism. This is for the simple reason that neither in root matter nor in development has more been put into writing, so that much will remain to be said after any pretended unveiling. The guardians of certain temples of initiation who keep watch over mysteries of this order have therefore no cause for alarm. In my preface to the Tarot of the Bohemians, which, rather by an accident of things, has recently come to be reissued after a long period, I have said what was then possible or seemed most necessary. The present work is designed more especially, as I have intimated, to introduce a rectified set of the cards themselves, and to tell the unadorned truth concerning them, so far as this is possible in the outer circles. As regards the sequence of greater symbols, their ultimate and highest meaning lies deeper than the common language of picture or hieroglyph. This will be understood by those who have received some part of the secret tradition. As regards the verbal meanings allocated here to the more important trump cards, they are designed to set aside the follies and impostures of past attributions, to put those who have the gift of insight on the right track, and to take care, within the limits of my possibilities, that they are the truth so far as they go. It is regrettable in several aspects that I must confess to certain reservations, but there is a question of honor at issue. Furthermore, between the follies on the one side of those who know nothing of the tradition, yet are in their own opinion the exponents of something called occult science and philosophy, and on the other side between the make-believe of a few writers who have received part of the tradition and think that it constitutes a legal title to scatter dust in the eyes of the world without, I feel that the time has come to say what it is possible to say, so that the effect of current charlatanism and unintelligence may be reduced to a minimum. We shall see, in due course, that the history of tarot cards is largely of the negative kind, and that, when the issues are cleared by the dissipation of reveries and gratuitous speculations expressed in the terms of certitude, there is in fact no history prior to the 14th century. The deception and self-deception regarding their origin in Egypt, India, or China put a lying spirit into the mouths of the first expositors, and the later occult writers have done little more than reproduce the first false testimony in the good faith of an intelligence unawakened to the issues of research. As it so happens, all expositions have worked within a very narrow range, and owe, comparatively speaking, little to the inventive faculty. One brilliant opportunity has at least been missed, for it has not so far occurred to anyone that the tarot might perhaps have done duty and even originated as a secret symbolical language of the Albigensian sects. I commend this suggestion to the lineal descendants in the spirit of Gabriel Rossetti and Eugene Aru, to Mr. Harold Bailey as another new light on the Renaissance, and as a taper at least in the darkness which, with great respect, might be serviceable to the zealous and all-searching mind of Mrs. Cooper Oakley. Think only what the supposed testimony of watermarks on paper might gain from the tarot card of the Pope or Hierophant, in connection with the notion of a secret Albigensian patriarch, of which Mr. Bailey has found in these same watermarks so much material to his purpose. Think only for a moment about the card of the High Priestess, as representing the Albigensian Church itself, and think of the tower, struck by lightning, as typifying the desired destruction of papal Rome, the city on the 7 hills, with a pontiff and his temporal power cast down from the spiritual edifice when it is riven by the wrath of God, nature. The possibilities are so numerous and persuasive that they almost deceive in their expression one of the elect who has invented them. But there is more even than this, though I scarcely dare to cite it. When the time came for the tarot cards to be the subject of their first formal explanation, the archaeologist Court de Gebelin reproduced some of their most important emblems, and, if I may so term it, the codex which he used has served, by means of his engraved plates, as a basis of reference for many sets that have been issued subsequently. The figures are very primitive, and differ as such from the cards of Italia, the Marseille Tarot, and others still current in France. I am not a good judge in such matters, but the fact that every one of the trumps major might have answered for watermark purposes is shown by the cases which I have quoted, and by one most remarkable example of the Ace of Cups. I should call it an Eucharistic emblem after the manner of a ciborium, but this does not signify at the moment. The point is that Mr. Harold Bailey gives 6 analogous devices in his new light on the Renaissance, being watermarks on paper of the 17th century, which he claims to be of Albigensian origin, and to represent sacramental and Graal emblems. Had he only heard of the tarot? Had he known that these cards of divination, cards of fortune, cards of all vagrant arts, were perhaps current at the period in the south of France, I think that his enchanting but all too fantastic hypothesis might have dilated still more largely in the atmosphere of his dream. We should no doubt have had a vision of Christian Gnosticism, Manichaeism, and all that he understands by pure primitive gospel shining behind the pictures. I do not look through such glasses, and I can only commend the subject to his attention at a later period. It is mentioned here that I may introduce with an unheard-of wonder the marvels of arbitrary speculation as to the history of the cards. With reference to their form and number, it should scarcely be necessary to enumerate them, for they must be almost commonly familiar. But as it is precarious to assume anything, and as there are also other reasons, I will tabulate them briefly as follows. Class 1, Section 2, Trumps Major, otherwise Greater Arcana. 1. The Magus, Magician, or Juggler, the caster of the dice and mountebank in the world of vulgar trickery. This is the colportage interpretation, and it has the same correspondence with the real symbolical meaning that the use of the tarot and fortune-telling has with its mystic construction, according to the secret science of symbolism. I should add that many independent students of the subject, following their own lights, have produced individual sequences of meaning in respect of the Trumps Major, and their lights are sometimes suggestive, but they are not the true lights. For example, Eliphas Levi says that the Magus signifies that unity, which is the mother of numbers. Others say that it is the divine unity, and one of the latest French commentators considers that, in its general sense, it is the will. 2. The High Priestess, the Pope Joan, or female pontiff. Early expositors have sought to term this card the Mother, or Pope's wife, which is opposed to the symbolism. It is sometimes held to represent the divine law and the gnosis, in which case the priestess corresponds to the idea of the Shekinah. She is the secret tradition and the higher sense of the instituted mysteries. 3. The Empress, who is sometimes represented with full face, while her correspondent, the Emperor, is in profile. As there has been some tendency to ascribe a symbolical significance to this distinction, it seems desirable to say that it carries no inner meaning. The Empress has been connected with the ideas of universal fecundity and, in a general sense, with activity. 4. The Emperor, by imputation the spouse of the former. He is occasionally represented as wearing, in addition to his personal insignia, the stars or ribbons of some order of chivalry. I mention this to show that the cards are a medley of old and new emblems. Those who insist upon the evidence of the one may deal, if they can, with the other. No effectual argument for the antiquity of a particular design can be drawn from the fact that it incorporates old material. But there is also none which can be based on sporadic novelties, the intervention of which may signify only the unintelligent hand of an editor or of a late draftsman. 5. The High Priest, or Hierophant, called also Spiritual Father, and more commonly and obviously, the Pope. It seems even to have been named the Abbot, and then its correspondence, the High Priestess, was Abbess or Mother of the Convent. Both are arbitrary names. The insignia of the figures are papal, and in such case the High Priestess is and can be only the Church, to whom Pope and priests are married by the spiritual rite of ordination. I think, however, that in its primitive form this card did not represent the Roman pontiff. 6. The Lovers, or Marriage. This symbol has undergone many variations, as might be expected from its subject. In the 18th century form, by which it first became known to the world of archaeological research, it is really a card of married life, showing father and mother, with their child placed between them, and the pagan Cupid above, as the act of flying his shaft is, of course, a misapplied emblem. The Cupid is of love beginning rather than of love in its fullness, guarding the fruit thereof. The card is said to have been entitled Simulacrum Fidei, the symbol of conjugal faith, for which the rainbow as a sign of the covenant would have been a more appropriate concomitant. The figures are also held to have signified truth, honor, and love, but I suspect that this was, so to speak, the gloss of a commentator moralizing. It has these, but it has other and higher aspects. 7. The Chariot. This is represented in some extant codices as being drawn by two sphinxes, and the device is in consonance with the symbolism, but it must not be supposed that such was its original form. The variation was invented to support a particular historical hypothesis. In the 18th century, white horses were yoked to the car. As regards its usual name, the lesser stands for the greater. It is really the king in his triumph, typifying, however, the victory which creates kingship as its natural consequence, and not the vested royalty of the fourth card. M. Court de Gebelin said that it was Osiris triumphing, the conquering sun in springtime having vanquished the obstacles of winter. We know now that Osiris rising from the dead is not represented by such obvious symbolism. Other animals than horses have also been used to draw the Surus Triumphalis, as for example, a lion and a leopard. 8. Fortitude. This is one of the cardinal virtues, of which I shall speak later. The female figure is usually represented as closing the mouth of a lion. In the earlier form, which is printed by Court de Gebelin, she is obviously opening it. The first alternative is better symbolically, but either is an instance of strength in its conventional understanding and conveys the idea of mastery. It has been said that the figure represents organic force, moral force, and the principle of all force. 9. The Hermit, as he is termed in common parlance, stands next on the list. He is also the Capuchin, and in more philosophical language, the sage. He is said to be in search of that truth which is located far off in the sequence, and of justice which has preceded him on the way. But this is a card of attainment, as we shall see later, rather than a card of quest. It is said also that his lantern contains the light of occult science, and that his staff is a magic wand. These interpretations are comparable in every respect to the divinatory and fortune-telling meanings with which I shall have to deal in their turn. The diabolism of both is that they are true after their own manner, but that they miss all the high things to which the greater arcana should be allocated. It is as if a man who knows in his heart that all roads lead to the heights, and that God, nature, is at the great height of all, should choose the way of perdition or the way of folly as the path of his own attainment. Eliphas Levi has allocated this card to prudence, but in so doing he has been actuated by the wish to fill a gap which would otherwise occur in the symbolism. The 4 cardinal virtues are necessary to an ideological sequence like the trumps major, but they must not be taken only in that first sense which exists for the use and consolation of him who in these days of halfpenny journalism is called the man in the street. In their proper understanding, they are the correlatives of the counsels of perfection, when these have been similarly re-expressed, and they read as follows. A. Transcendental justice, the counter-equilibrium of the scales, when they have been overweighted so that they dip heavily on the side of God, nature. The corresponding counsel is to use loaded dice when you play for high stakes with Diabolus. The axiom is aut deus aut nihil. B. Divine ecstasy, as a counterpoise to something called Temperance, the sign of which is, I believe, the extinction of lights on the tavern. The corresponding counsel is to drink only of new wine in the kingdom of the Father, because God, nature, is all in all. The axiom is that man, being a reasonable being, must get intoxicated with God, nature. The imputed case in point is Spinoza. C. The royal state of fortitude, which is the state of a tower of ivory and a house of gold, but it is God, nature, and not the man who has become turius fortitudinus a faci inimici, and out of that house the enemy has been cast. The corresponding counsel is that a man must not spare himself even in the presence of death, but he must be certain that his sacrifice shall be, of any open course, the best that will ensure his end. The axiom is that the strength which is raised to such a degree that a man dares lose himself shall show him how nature, God, is found. And as to such refuge, dare therefore and learn. D. Prudence is the economy which follows the line of least resistance, that the soul may get back whence it came. It is a doctrine of divine parsimony and conservation of energy, because of the stress, the terror, and the manifest impertinences of this life. The corresponding counsel is that true prudence is concerned with the one thing needful, and the axiom is, waste not, want not. The conclusion of the whole matter is a business proposition founded on the law of exchange. You cannot help getting what you seek in respect of the things that are divine. It is the law of supply and demand. I have mentioned these few matters at this point for two simple reasons. A. Because in proportion to the impartiality of the mind, it seems sometimes more difficult to determine whether it is vice or vulgarity which lays waste the present world more piteously. B. Because in order to remedy the imperfections of the old notions, it is highly needful, on occasion, to empty terms and phrases of their accepted significance, that they may receive a new and more adequate meaning. 10. The Wheel of Fortune. There is a current manual of cartomancy which has obtained a considerable vogue in England, and amidst a great scattermeal of curious things to no purpose has intersected a few serious subjects. In its last and largest edition, it treats in one section of the tarot, which, if I interpret the author rightly, it regards from beginning to end as the Wheel of Fortune, this expression being understood in my own sense. I have no objection to such an inclusive, though conventional, description. It obtains in all the worlds, and I wonder that it has not been adopted previously as the most appropriate name on the side of common fortune-telling. It is also the title of one of the trumps major, that indeed of our concern at the moment, as my subtitle shows. Of recent years, this has suffered many fantastic presentations and one hypothetical reconstruction, which is suggestive in its symbolism. The wheel has 7 radii. In the 18th century, the ascending and descending animals were really of nondescript character, one of them having a human head. At the summit was another monster with the body of an indeterminate beast, wings on shoulders and a crown on head. It carried 2 wands in its claws. These are replaced in the reconstruction by a Hermanubis rising with the wheel, a sphinx couchant at the summit, and a typhon on the descending side. Here is another instance of an invention in support of a hypothesis, but if the latter be set aside, the grouping is symbolically correct and can pass as such. 11. Justice. That the tarot, though it is of all reasonable antiquity, is not of time immemorial, is shown by this card, which could have been presented in a much more archaic manner. Those, however, who have gifts of discernment in matters of this kind will not need to be told that age is in no sense of the essence of the consideration. The right of closing the lodge in the 3rd craft grade of masonry may belong to the late 18th century, but the fact signifies nothing. It is still the summary of all the instituted and official mysteries. The female figure of the 11th card is said to be Astrea, who personified the same virtue and is represented by the same symbols. This goddess notwithstanding, and notwithstanding the vulgarian Cupid, the tarot is not of Roman mythology or of Greek either. Its presentation of justice is supposed to be one of the 4 cardinal virtues included in the sequence of greater arcana. But, as it so happens, 4th emblem is wanting, and it became necessary for the commentators to discover it at all costs. They did what it was possible to do, and yet the laws of research have never succeeded in extricating the missing Persephone under the form of prudence. Court de Gebelin attempted to solve the difficulty by a tour de force, and believed that he had extracted what he wanted from the symbol of the hanged man, wherein he deceived himself. The tarot has, therefore, its justice, its temperance also, and its fortitude. But, owing to a curious omission, it does not offer us any type of prudence, though it may be admitted that, in some respects, the isolation of the hermit, pursuing a solitary path by the light of his own lamp, gives, to those who can receive it, a certain high counsel in respect of the via prudentiae. 12. The hanged man. This is the symbol which is supposed to represent prudence, and Eliphas Levi says, in his most shallow and plausible manner, that it is the adept bound by his engagements. The figure of a man is suspended head downwards from a gibbet, to which he is attached by a rope about one of his ankles. The arms are bound behind him, and one leg is crossed over the other. According to another, and indeed the prevailing interpretation, he signifies sacrifice, but all current meanings attributed to this card are cartomancists' intuitions, apart from any real value, on the symbolical side. The fortune-tellers of the 18th century, who circulated tarots, depict a semi-feminine youth in jerkin, poised erect on one foot and loosely attached to a short stake driven into the ground. 13. Death. The method of presentation is almost invariable and embodies a bourgeois form of symbolism. The scene is the field of life, and amidst ordinary rank vegetation, there are living arms and heads protruding from the ground. One of the heads is crowned, and a skeleton with a great scythe is in the act of mowing it. The transparent and unescapable meaning is death, but the alternatives allocated to the symbol are change and transformation. Other heads have been swept from their place previously, but it is, in its current and patent meaning, more especially a card of the death of kings. In the exotic sense, it has been said to signify the ascent of the spirit in the divine spheres, creation and destruction, perpetual movement, and so forth. 14. Temperance. The winged figure of a female, who, in opposition to all doctrine concerning the hierarchy of angels, is usually allocated to this order of ministering spirits, is pouring liquid from one pitcher to another. In his last work on the tarot, Dr. Pappas abandons the traditional form and depicts a woman wearing an Egyptian headdress. The first thing which seems clear on the surface is that the entire symbol has no especial connection with temperance, and the fact that this designation has always obtained for the card offers a very obvious instance of a meaning behind a meaning, which is the title in chief to consideration in respect of the tarot as a whole. 15. The Devil. In the 18th century, this card seems to have been rather a symbol of merely animal impudicity. Except for a fantastic headdress, the chief figure is entirely naked. It has bat-like wings, and the hands and feet are represented by the claws of a bird. In the right hand, there is a scepter terminating in a sign, which has been thought to represent fire. The figure as a whole is not particularly evil. It has no tail, and the commentators who have said that the claws are those of a harpy have spoken at random. There is no better ground for the alternative suggestion that they are eagle's claws. Attached by a cord depending from their collars, to the pedestal on which the figure is mounted, are two small demons, presumably male and female. These are tailed but not winged. Since 1856, the influence of Eliphas Levi and his doctrine of occultism has changed the face of this card, and it now appears as a pseudo-Baphometic figure with the head of a goat and a great torch between the horns. It is seated instead of erect, and in place of the generative organs there is the Hermetic caduceus. In Le Tarot Divinator of Pappas, the small demons are replaced by naked human beings, male and female, who are yoked only to each other. The author may be felicitated on this improved symbolism. 16. The Tower Struck by Lightning. Its alternative titles are Castle of Plutus, God's, Nature's House, and the Tower of Babel. In the last case, the figures falling therefrom are held to be Nimrod and his minister. It is assuredly a card of confusion, and the design corresponds, broadly speaking, to any of the designations except Maison Dieu, unless we are to understand that the house of God, nature, has been abandoned and the veil of the temple rent. It is a little surprising that the device has not so far been allocated to the destruction of Solomon's temple, when the lightning would symbolize the fire and sword with which that edifice was visited by the king of the Chaldees. 17. The star, dog star, or Sirius, also called fantastically the Star of the Magi. Grouped about it are 7 minor luminaries, and beneath it is a naked female figure, with her left knee upon the earth and her right foot upon the water. She is in the act of pouring fluids from 2 vessels. A bird is perched on a tree near her. For this, a butterfly on a rose has been substituted in some later cards. So also the star has been called that of hope. This is one of the cards which Court de Gibelin describes as wholly Egyptian, that is to say, in his own reverie. 18. The moon. Some 18th century cards show the luminary on its waning side. In the debased edition of Ataya, it is the moon at night in her plenitude, set in a heaven of stars. Of recent years, the moon is shown on the side of her increase. In nearly all presentations, she is shining brightly and shedding the moisture of fertilizing dew in great drops. Beneath, there are 2 towers, between which a path winds to the verge of the horizon. 2 dogs, or alternatively a wolf and a dog, are baying at the moon, and in the foreground there is water, through which a crayfish moves towards the land. 19. The sun. The luminary is distinguished in older cards by chief rays that are waved and salient alternately and by secondary salient rays. It appears to shed its influence on Earth not only by light and heat, but, like the moon, by drops of dew. Court de Gibelin termed these tears of gold and of pearl just as he identified the lunar dew with the tears of Isis. Beneath the dog star there is a wall suggesting an enclosure, as it might be a walled garden, wherein are 2 children, either naked or lightly clothed, facing a water, and gamboling or running hand in hand. Eliphas Levi says that these are sometimes replaced by a spinner unwinding destinies, and otherwise by a much better symbol, a naked child mounted on a white horse and displaying a scarlet standard. 20. The Last Judgment. I have spoken of this symbol already, the form of which is essentially invariable, even in the Ataya set. An angel sounds his trumpet per sepulchra regionum, and the dead arise. It matters little that Ataya omits the angel, or that Dr. Papist substitutes a ridiculous figure, which, however, in consonance with the general motive of that tarot set which accompanies his latest work. Before rejecting the transparent interpretation of the symbolism, which is conveyed by the name of the card and by the picture which it presents to the eye, we should feel very sure of our ground. On the surface, at least, it is and can be only the resurrection of that triad, Father, Mother, Child, whom we have met with already in the 8th card. M. Beauregard hazards the suggestion that esoterically it is the symbol of evolution, of which it carries none of the signs. Others say that it signifies renewal, which is obvious enough, that it is the triad of human life, that it is the generative force of the earth and eternal life. Court de Gibelin makes himself impossible as usual, and points out that if the gravestones were removed, it could be accepted as a symbol of creation. 21, which, however, in most of the arrangements is the cipher card, number nothing, the fool, mate, or unwise man. Court de Gibelin places it at the head of the whole series as the 0 or negative, which is presupposed by numeration. And as this is a simpler, so also it is a better arrangement. It has been abandoned because in later times the cards have been attributed to the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and there has been apparently some difficulty about allocating the 0 symbol satisfactorily in a sequence of letters, all of which signify numbers. In the present reference of the card to the letter Shin, which corresponds to 200, the difficulty or the unreason remains. The truth is that the real arrangement of the cards has never transpired. The Fool carries a wallet. He is looking over his shoulder and does not know that he is on the brink of a precipice. But a dog or other animal, some call it a tiger, is attacking him from behind, and he is hurried to his destruction unawares. Ataya has given a justifiable variation of this card, as generally understood, in the form of a court jester with cap, bells, and motley garb. The other descriptions say that the wallet contains the bearer's follies and vices, which seems bourgeois and arbitrary. 22. The world, the universe, or time. The 4 living creatures of the apocalypse and Ezekiel's vision, attributed to the evangelists and Christian symbolism, are grouped about an elliptic garland, as if it were a chain of flowers intended to symbolize all sensible things. Within this garland there is the figure of a woman, whom the wind has girt about the loins with the light scarf, and this is all her vesture. She is in the act of dancing, and has a wand in either hand. It is eloquent as an image of the swirl of the sensitive life, of joy attained in the body, of the soul's intoxication in the earthly paradise, but still guarded by the divine watchers, as if by the powers and the graces of the holy name. Tetragrammaton, those 4 ineffable letters which are sometimes attributed to the mystical beasts. Eliphas Levi calls the garland a crown, and reports that the figure represents truth. Dr. Pappas connects it with the absolute and the realization of the great work. For yet others, it is a symbol of humanity and the eternal reward of a life that has been well spent. It should be noted that in the 4 quarters of the garland there are 4 flowers distinctly marked. According to P. Christian, the garland should be formed of roses, and this is the kind of chain which Eliphas Levi says is less easily broken than a chain of iron. Perhaps by antithesis, but for the same reason, the iron crown of Peter may lie more lightly on the heads of sovereign pontiffs than the crown of gold on kings. Class 2, Section 3, The 4 Suits, otherwise Lesser Arcana. The resources of interpretation have been lavished, if not exhausted, on the 22 trumps major, the symbolism of which is unquestionable. There remain the 4 suits, being wands or scepters, ex hypothesi, in the archaeology of the subject, the antecedents of diamonds in modern cards, cups corresponding to hearts, swords, which answer to clubs, as the weapon of chivalry is in relation to the peasant's quarterstaff or the Alstein bludgeon, and finally pentacles, also called deniers and money, which are the prototypes of spades. In the old as in the new suits, there are 10 numbered cards, but in the tarot there are 4 court cards allocated to each suit, or a knight, in addition to king, queen, and knave. The knave is a page, valet, or damoiseau. Most correctly, he is an esquire, presumably in the service of the knight. But there are certain rare sets in which the page becomes a maid of honor, thus pairing the sexes in the tetrad of the court cards. There are naturally distinctive features in respect of the several pictures, by which I mean that the King of Wands is not exactly the same personage as the King of Cups, even after allowance has been made for the different emblems that they bear. But the symbolism resides in their rank and in the suit to which they belong. So also the smaller cards, which, until now, have never been issued pictorially in these our modern days, depend on the particular meaning attached to their numbers in connection with the particular suit. I reserve, therefore, the details of the lesser arcana till I come to speak in the second part of the rectified and perfected tarot which accompanies this work. The consensus of divinatory meanings attached both to the greater and lesser symbols belongs to the third part. End of Part 1, Section 3.